Hello and welcome to a new video. My name is Alejandro Escuder and I am instructor at Cinematic Composing. So if you have seen any of my previous videos in the channel, you probably have noticed I work mainly with Logic as a DAW. But today what we are bringing is something that you can use actually in any DAW that you are using. And the topic is managing articulations. So when we are composing orchestral music and we are using, for example, violins, cellos, clarinets, horns. Normally they have several ways of playing. You can play short notes, you can play long notes, long sustains with more legato, with less legato, pizzicato, different techniques. Usually these articulations or different techniques that we can use are recorded separately in the libraries that we are using. Let's move to the computer and see it there. So traditionally we have had two ways of managing these different articulations. One of it is working with separate tracks, one for articulations. We know we can have many more. In fact, if I go back to the library and you see I have all of them. I have all these techniques that CineStreamScore can offer me. Every library can offer different. But as you see, I have created one single instrument for each articulations. So for example, this instrument will play only spiccato, this will play only staccato, sustains, tremolo, pizzicato, and assign to each of them different MIDI channel. That's necessary because if you don't assign a different MIDI channel, then you would play all together. So for example, if I decide to put sustains also in channel 1, the same as spiccato, okay, when I go here and I play in channel 1, both of them will sound. First the spiccato, the short attack, and then it will stay the sustain. Okay, it creates a weird effect. Sometimes it can be interesting to combine short notes in long notes for some purposes. So usually we will want to separate MIDI channels and assign here to MIDI channel 3. So when we go to our track in Logic, assign to the same instrument, but in MIDI channel 3 it will play only the sustains. And the same with spiccato, staccato, tremolo, and pizzicato. All right, so the other possibility is to use what is called key switches. Key switches are just some keys in your keyboard that will trigger a function of your library to play different articulations. I'm gonna load just for the same purpose the same instrument, but the key switches version. Basically, if I activate this, when I press C key in my keyboard, it will play spiccato. When I place D, it will play staccato. Marcato in E, legato in F, and then tremolo, for example, in A. So we get the same, but instead of using several tracks, we only use one. The discussion between whether it's better to use key switches or separate tracks for different articulations is a discussion that it's running already for a long time. I don't know if there's still a clear winner, but I can say that most of the libraries now are moving towards key switch. So let's talk about the pros and cons of having key switches or separate tracks. So probably the main advantage of having key switches is that you only need one track, and then you can write your violin and change the different articulations just with the lower keys of your keyboard. I mean, it's different in each library. But this also has an inconvenience, and it's that it's playing below the notes I have pressed in order to trigger the new articulation that I want to play. But definitely it's a very good advantage in terms of not having many tracks, and also because it saves a lot of space in your project. If you're using separate tracks, maybe I need like 10 for violin 1, 10 for violin 2, etc. Okay, so that's maybe the main con of having separate MIDI tracks. Having the track fragmented in the different articulations also is very uncomfortable when you want to extract this to a score notation. Okay, it's much easier when you just extract this MIDI file here, export MIDI file, and then you already have it all in one line of the violin. The only thing that you have to do is to remove the key switches. That's before exporting the MIDI. So in general, it's a little bit easier to work with key switches if then later you're going to transform it to a score. However, there is a pro that I haven't mentioned about having separate articulations. So for example, let's say that for the purposes later mixing better, I want to separate the outputs of the short attacks from the one that are long attacks. I can, for example, select the output 1 for spiccato, staccato, and pizzicato, and output 2 for sustains and tremolo. I just have to open here, and the output 3, 4 will be for the violin long attacks, and this one will be for the violin short attacks. And if I go to sustain, it will go out through the other output, to which I can add different effects, different equalization, different compression, especially different reverb. So the management between MIDI tracks and outputs, it's like each MIDI track is an instrument into the room. And each output, it's a different microphone, when later you can add different effects to the signal that this microphone is catching. So in this particular case, there would be 3 violins here, one that only plays spiccato, the other only plays staccato, and the other only plays pizzicato. The 3 of them all together with a microphone. And in the other part of the room, there would be 2 that play sustains and tremolos, and they would be catched also by 1 microphone. Discussion about MIDI tracks and outputs and how to manage that, it's a long discussion, so we will take care about that in a further video. By the way, at the end, I'm gonna give you some solutions of how you can deal with all that. The main problem that I see also in KEYSWITCHES is that every library uses different ones. I have a section here from Scene Samples, and let's say that I want to combine that with another one. For example, Thematic Studio Strings, which is also made for KEYSWITCHES. The problem here is that, for example, here in C0, you find the sustain, where in Scene Strings, you find the spiccato. So they can work together. So if I want to make them work together, I will have to manually rebuild it. That's not practical at all. So that's a big con, in my opinion. Yet another con that I see of KEYSWITCHES is that if I want to separate the output of different articulations, I cannot do it because every key switch, it's gonna go through the stereo one here. A little trick that I use sometimes is just to load the instrument twice, and as you see, each of them takes 0.86 gigabytes of my RAM. But in the total here, you can only see 0.86. That's because they are the same samples, so they don't need more RAM. For separating outputs, I would need to go to contact and to change it to multi-output. Boom, now I have available stereo 2. And what I do in this way is go to the mixer, I open this output, violin long, click here, and I click on create track, okay? In this case, I don't do it with MIDI tracks because for me it's more practical just to add the auxiliary channel here where I also can play. There are as many tracks as outputs, okay? In this case, it's better to work with MIDI tracks because you have 5 for 1 or 2 outputs, but in this case, it's better to adjust the auxiliary channel this way that I show you. I would use only this to use short notes, and then change here only for the long note. Okay, so let's talk about the possible solutions that we have to manage that. The first solution probably it would be just as easy as learning the KEYSWITCHES, but we have a tool here that are expression maps or articulation sets, as it's called here in Logic. There's a company called Babylon Waves that offer already pre-map articulations from all the major companies. Okay, so for example, if we look here to an articulation set, when I go through the violin KEYSWITCHES, and I go to Our Conductor, which is a product of Babylon Waves, you see here tons of libraries. So what you only thing that you have to do is to select your library. For example, in this case, scene samples, scene strings core, factory, and violin 1 articulations. Look what it happens. Key switches. So what happens with violin waves, what's cool about it is that you have all the libraries mapped in a similar way. Meaning that, for example, all the pizzicatos are mapped to the same key, so that you only have to remember once one key where the pizzicato is, and not for every single library, which is very convenient. And also thanks to the articulation sets, I don't need this anymore. Okay, I can delete these notes. Then I only have to select those and say I want long notes. And these ones, for example, I want them spiccato. So okay, these ones are marcato, and then I can do it this way. And in theory, because they match to all other libraries, if I move this region to another track with another library of violins, in theory they should match. Okay, it's not perfect because not every library offers exactly the same articulations, but it saves tons of time of working. Still, it has the downside that you cannot change the outputs. Okay, it would be amazing if this would evolve. I believe that there has to be a way to separate long and short notes to different outputs. Another solution that would imply working with separate MIDI tracks for separate articulations would be working with MIDI channels. Okay, for example, I have an instrument that has 5 tracks with 5 MIDI channels. If you remember, we have routed 2 separate outputs. So this way of separating MIDI tracks and in different MIDI channels allows us to divide the outputs of short and long attacks, or whatever we are wanting to do. So working with several tracks, it's no mystery. But what if I remove all of them? And here, instead of choosing MIDI channel 1, MIDI channel all. Okay, so if now I play my keyboard, of course it's gonna sound spiccato, because my keyboard is sending by default MIDI channel 1, which is related to spiccato. But what if I could, with my keyboard, select the channel I want to send? Every keyboard has the possibility to change the MIDI channel that it's sending the information, at least to 16 different MIDI channels. I'm gonna call it violin master, because now I have all my possibilities in here. So the way I do it with my Complete Control S61 is using this application called Controller Editor. So for example, if you see, when I select spiccato and I go to assign, it says that it's assigned to channel 1, the keyboard. Staccato is assigned to channel 2, and sustain to channel 3. So by default, if I'm here, it will play spiccato. But if I change here, it will play sustain and pizzicato, all in the same track. So you can do it also on the way. I'm starting playing staccato and sustain and pizzicato. I have recorded this. I don't have any key switches, but it plays here, legato and pizzicato. And the only thing that happened here is that the instrument is playing different MIDI channels. How amazing is that? And in this way, I can manage the separate output. So if we check here, when it plays short notes, it will come through here, and when it plays sustain, it will come through violin long. And same track, you know, so then when I extract the MIDI, I have all in one. So that's really amazing, and it's something that you should consider, okay? So if you would want to manage it here in the piano roll in a similar way to the Babylon waves, You just have to create your own articulation set. And the good thing is that if you create sort of a template where all your instruments will play in MIDI channel 1, sort of the short attacks, and in MIDI channel 3, all the sustains, you don't have to remember all the key switches. You can't forget about that. The only thing you have to do is always, when you create a new instrument, so for example, I'm gonna create a flute. The only thing I have to remember is that MIDI channel 1 was the shortest ones. So for example, the 8ths. Later it would be like quarters, staccato, flute, legato. The good thing is that now with the same configuration, I know that in spiccato my flutes are gonna play short. With staccato are gonna play like short but a little bit more. And one step more. All the instruments will match the same way of working if you decide to go for this method. And last but not least, I'm going to show you one that it's not very used, but I think it's interesting to know. It would be just go here and in Contact, create a new instrument. Okay, so what you have to go is here and say, I want a new instrument bank. And this shows. And what happens? I have 128 slots to place my instruments. First will be spiccato, second will be staccato, third will be sustains, tremolo. And the only thing that you have to do is, once you have this, go to your automations and select program change. Okay, by default it's nothing, but for example, let's say that I want these notes to be legato, and legato was program change number 3. So what I'm gonna do is select here number 3, and for these notes which I want, for example spiccato, I'm gonna change the program to 1. Okay, and then let's say that I want from here in tremolo. So personally, I like the second option, which is working with the violin master and different MIDI channels, but you can choose the one that is best for you, or you can go the old way and stay with the key switches or just separate tracks. So I hope that you have found this tutorial interesting. If you liked it and you want to support us and follow us, just don't forget to click subscribe and also give a like. That for sure it will give us a lot of good feedback to keep working and to keep bringing new tutorials with useful information. All right, so have a nice day and I see you in the next tutorial.